Meet the Ministers. My guest on the program this evening is John-Paul Langbroek. Tell me about going to school. I mean, with this missionary background, your parents doing a fair bit of travelling around. You said you went back to the States for a while, come back here to Australia. Do you have your eye on a prize already at that early age as you were moving into your teens, thinking about university or what a career might lie ahead of you?
No, not really. I was at Sunnybank State High. I'd been to Coorparoo State High and then Brisbane State High. So I've travelled. My father was a teacher at a school out near Coorparoo, and we just moved over to the south side.
So you basically go to the school at whichever he was teaching?
Well, he was a primary school teacher at Mayfield State School, though. So I went to Coorparoo State High. My sister went to Coorparoo State School, and then subsequently I ended up at Salisbury State High, and Kate ended up at I ended up at Sunnybank State High, and Kate was at Salisbury State High. That's where we completed our schooling. But no, I didn't really decide what I was going to do until back in those days the old QTAC form came through, and you put 6 preferences. Yeah. And in those days it was completely, and we're talking about 1978, there was this mystique about what it meant to get a tertiary entrance score, and that you had to be careful not to waste your preference. And so I remember the Dux of our school, who's a well-known paediatrician now, basically put down medicine because he said he knew he was going to get 990, and I had guidance officers back in those days who said, we don't think you'll get the score necessary to put down dentistry, so don't put it down because you don't want to waste your first preference. Thankfully I didn't listen to that guidance officer. I put down dentistry and I got in.
What TE score did you get?
Oh, mate, I can't look as though I can remember my TE score from 1978, but I can remember getting I still remember getting the envelope that had your TE score in one envelope and the offer of university in the other, and running around the garden yelling to my father, I got it, because it was such a vivid, I didn't realise how significant it was going to be in my life that going to university and becoming a dentist would change you. You don't realise that when you're 17. Amazing
that buzz that was going on between your friends and your family and your neighbours and everything else as those envelopes started to arrive in the mail on that day, those couple of days, wasn't it?
Oh, it was pretty stressful. But subsequently it became even more stressful when you go to university, especially in our day. You didn't get results online. I remember going to Bowen Hills when the Courier Mail would come out at midnight to get your university results. And there'd be people crying on the side, on the gutter, sitting on the gutter, crying if they'd failed things. Some people who ended up with supplementary exams. Yes, and that's how we got our results in the early 80s. Very different to my kids now who log in online and just basically walk out of the study and say, "Oh, here are my results."
Did you enjoy dentistry?
Yeah, I did love it. I loved the getting on with people and communicating with people about.
It's a very personal business.
Well, it is. It's a very, very private profession in terms of, it's a place where very rarely do we let people into our, into your own space, and you're letting someone get very, very close to you, and so therefore you need to be able to trust them. And often patients don't really know what's happening. They have to rely on the person who's doing the treatment to do the right thing, and so they're very, very apprehensive.
There's so many things that we could talk about. It's a successful career on the Gold Coast, of running your practice for 20 odd years. Why make the change into politics?
Well, I just joined the Liberal Party in 1999, and I'd been a friend asked me to join the Liberal Party.
A good move for a local businessman?
Well, it was more that he was interested in becoming a member of Parliament, and as we do now, the way to do that is to get more people to support you. And so it was a membership drive that he was conducting, and a couple of people had said to me, you should consider joining the Liberal Party, and to me it was something I didn't really understand what it might be, but anyway, I went along and joined, and just through circumstances, I didn't think I'd end up a member of Parliament, but through a series of circumstances, the then opposition leader, Rob Borbidge, quit on the night of the 2001 election, and the Liberal Party didn't hold the seat. It was a National Party seat, and I said, look, I'm happy to have a go, when everyone said we don't think anyone can win it. And I ran in a by-election which was held 3 months after the Beattie landslide of 2001. Didn't win the seat then, but subsequently won it in 2004. But I'd actually gotten involved in the party through community involvement, and that was through joining the local Chamber of Commerce, going to the local police station and hearing about some issues that were quite significant in Surfers Paradise at the time. The hooning issue was very big, we had a real problem in those days before we now have these laws that mean you can confiscate vehicles. And there was also a real problem, as we still have to an extent, but not as great as it was, of minors drinking alcohol in private units during schoolies.
Yeah.
And so those two issues, I found when I went to the police station to a series of meetings there, that my interest was piqued by the fact that you might be able to do something about it, as opposed to what most people would think, that going to meetings is quite boring. And dentistry is much more one-on-one, of course, with a patient. This seemed a bit more global. It piqued my interest. I got involved and then subsequently won the seat, and here I am 7 years later.
Have you enjoyed the ride over the last 7 years?
Well, it's been fantastic. It really is a great job, and for all there's a lot of criticism of politicians and their reasons for doing the job, or their motivations and their motives. It's a great job, and it really does give you the chance to see, in this case, a lot of Queensland, meet Queenslanders, and achieve better things for all of us and for our future.
The Gold Coast is in the press for a lot of reasons these days, a lot of the wrong reasons, a lot of violence, a lot of gun crime. Is it getting worse down there? Is it getting better? Is there a light on the horizon at the moment, you think, to kind of break this cycle of violence and antisocial behaviour that's been going on for quite a while now?
I think that it's pretty important to separate what we often put out as political messages and what the reality is for those of us who live there. For a lot of us who live on the Gold Coast, who are bringing up our families as people do throughout the state and throughout the country, I really hate it when I hear this constant criticism of the Gold Coast for many different things, whether it's the style of place that it is, or these issues about violence and drug crime that we're experiencing. We're a community like any other, but it's also become, in the 40 years that I've been involved down at the Gold Coast, it's grown from a town of about 50,000 people to Australia's sixth biggest city, with a population of 550,000 or something. So, of course, we've got those problems, but we obviously need to have the resources provided by government, and most of us don't experience any of the problems that we see that are so publicised. So it's not quite as it would seem. It's a wonderful place to live. My children have loved growing up there and consider themselves to be proud Gold Coasters. Never
as bad as the media would have you assume, the way they focus on certain things.
No, but that is the modern media, and it's just how things are. We get a real intense analysis and scrutiny and criticism of whether it's politicians or whatever the political issue of the day is, and that, I think, is something that all people who are involved in politics are acutely aware of, and we, at times, as politicians, we use that in our favour to try to highlight the things we want to when we're in opposition, and we also then are subject to some of the problems that come from the media saying such things as the Gold Coast, the most violent place in Australia. I just don't believe that's the case, but there are some people who say it, and over time those perceptions can become reality unless those of us in public office and those of us who live there don't do as much as we can to change those perceptions.
How does your average politician feel about the focus being put back on the media a little bit, with what's been happening, for example, in the UK with News Corp in the last couple of months?
Well, I know that I can't comment, of course, for others, but I know that I've certainly noticed what's happened there, and having lived in England for 3 years and seen what papers like News of the World were like, there was that little element that used to find quite interesting, to the voyeuristic element of the showbiz that we often see, that we're all a bit fascinated with, but that politics is not showbiz. But I must admit that when I heard that story, was a little relieved, because I had no doubt that whatever was happening in England, if it hasn't been happening here, potentially could happen. And I think that this has meant that a lot of those editors and journalists sometimes have to consider exactly how far they're prepared to go to get a story, because often those of us who are the subject of the story don't necessarily get the chance to say, I don't think the way you got that story was actually correct or ethical, and you don't get to put your point of view.
Be nice to think that things might even up a little bit in the next period.
Well, I have no doubt that whether it's the newspaper proprietors or the editors, it's probably made them think, many of them, that you just can't do anything to get a story, just as politicians can't just say anything to get elected.
Yeah, very much so. You're watching Meet the Ministers. We'll be back after the break.